We're wrapping up a series. We're talking about the mission of Port City Community Church, and I'm really glad that you guys are here today. It's such an honor for us to be together, and it certainly says a lot about your commitment to be here on such a beautiful day outside, right? So thank you for being here. We're about to be 25 years old. It's coming up in October. The church will be 25 years old. I've been here all 25 years. And it's extraordinary to think and to reflect on all that has happened in 25 years. And so I want to really use these 3 weeks to bring us into what is our responsibility as a church. How are we and how do we become the way that we are? And what is it that God, I think, has for us going forward? Kind of the essence of what we are to do here in this world. And so our mission statement is really simple. It's to reach people and help them walk with God. And many of you have heard that, many of you have seen that. And we've been focused on this, this idea of reach and help. And then today I want to talk about walk. And as over the course of years, this statement has, I've looked at it a gajillion times. I've reflected on it, I've thought about it, and it continues to compel me. It continues to be the thing that kind of moves me forward in what I believe God is calling for our church. And it's not, this statement, as simple as it is, it's gotten deeper. It's deepened in its meaning. We've mentioned this, and that's part of been the intent of this series. Reaching people is not just a strategy to get people to come into our church, right? It's not just a strategy to get bigger. Reach actually measures what we're willing to care about. It measures the condition of our heart. It's what are we willing to extend ourselves to? Who are we willing to extend ourselves to? We talked about we have to cultivate compassion for other people and things that are happening in our world, to enter into those places and to give ourselves to them. The idea of help isn't just offering advice or help people get on track or help people behave, but it's to be helpful. And it's ultimately to be helpful in connecting people relationally, which is a function of building trust. And today, what I'd like to do is give you a vision, hopefully to give you a vision that is worthy of building your life upon. And that's the object of our help. We want to help people walk with God. And I've been doing this a long time. And in fact, this is part of the struggle. Around Port City, the idea of a walk with God is so important for how we think about our relationship with Christ and how we have long operated as a church. We heard baptisms this morning. We love hearing stories about people coming to Christ and taking their first steps with Him. We love that, no question. But around Port City, you'll notice we don't highlight a lot of that. And this, no disrespect to anybody, but we don't do a lot of, like, look how many salvations we had, or look how many we don't do that. Because in my way of thinking, I'm not so concerned about your first decision for Christ. I'm concerned about your 10,000th. I want to be able to work and to live in such a way, to operate our church in such a way that we can actually be helpful to that point in time. That when things happen, when you're disappointed, when God doesn't do what you wanted, when all these things happen, that you still are able to learn how to walk with Him through all the seasons of your life. And that really is the hardest part of a church. It's actually what Jesus called us to do. He said, when He gave us His commission, He said to go and make disciples. Make people who learn how to, or develop people who learn how to be developed by me and to live that out together over the course of their lives. And that's been the focus for most of my ministry here at Port City and hopefully our church. And so a lot of this comes from these deeply held convictions. We looked at some of them last week. St. Augustine famously said that our hearts, we've been made for you, O God, and our hearts will be restless until they find our rest in you. And that's sort of the condition, right? We're always churning and always yearning and always longing. And my own journey into this, I remember just being, when I was younger, I wanted things so badly. And a lot of the things that I realized that I wanted were not actually good things. It was kind of surprising to me that you could want wrong things. Did you know that? You can want things that are not helpful or healthy or good for you or good for anybody else. So we can just want them out of nowhere. And I remember trying to wrestle. I was a kid, so I'm trying to wrestle. It's like, where does this come from? And what I had sort of assumed is that the solution to this was to stop wanting anything so badly. You just sort of numb yourself and you become just sort of stoic. And what I realized when I began to read and kind of hear some things in the scriptures, delight yourself in the Lord, there was a calling for us to long, and that's where these convictions begin to develop. If you've been around Port City, there's 3 core convictions that I have. If God created life, he alone gets to define it. Number 2 is every longing at its core is a longing for life. That everything that you want in the deepest parts, you want to be alive. And what God has said to us, it is the relationship with him. It's a restored, reconciled relationship to him in Christ that brings the life that we want. And it's kind of a take it or leave it kind of offer. It's like you can pursue this and see if it pans out. Or you can continue to chase the restlessness that we know the world has. And so I was young and I thought, I'm gonna try this and see if I can learn to understand what this is like. And what you learn is this happens step by step by step. And this sort of gave way to the language of our church, this idea of helping people to walk with God. Now, this has kind of come back with a sense of freshness over the last year or so. And that's because when we first started Port City, my kids were small. And my youngest was already walking, but I remember the visualization well. But now we have a granddaughter. She is just turned, or about to be 2 years old, and she is walking. And I'll tell you, it has been the most incredible thing to watch her learn how to walk. We take this for granted because you just walk around all the time, you don't go, man. But like if you think about what's happening, I'm like almost 6 foot tall, and I'm much taller than I am wide. You see this, right? I'm kind of like a plank. And if you took like a piece of wood shaped like me and you stood it up here, what was gonna happen to it? It's gonna fall over. It's like no one thinks that this is not natural, but we just do it all the time without thinking. It's extraordinary to think that I'm not falling over. I'm not even tempted to fall over. I'm not thinking about falling over. In fact, I can stand here and do all kinds of other things without thinking about standing here and still stand here. Does that make sense? It's miraculous. It is a miraculous thing. And what I've been able to do with Lennon is you watch this whole process unfold, because when they're little, they are so unstable. And this makes perfect sense. All fours on the floor, you're not gonna hit your head on the hardwood, you're not gonna fall on a coffee table. This makes perfect sense. Stay there. And they start doing this, and you realize this kid cannot stand up to save her life. And she's trying, and you're grabbing on and holding her, and you're just watching all this unfold, and you realize how unbelievably miraculous this is. In fact, what's happening is her brain and her body are starting to cooperate together. You have little hairs in your ears and fluid that tells you that you're upright in space. It's extraordinary. And it's all working together to tell her where to put her feet in relationship to her body to keep her from running into things, falling over, and it's all happening at like a year old. It's crazy. And what's funny is you can watch her use every part of her body to learn how to walk. And this is what it looks like when she starts off, and now she zips around, but she gets pretty fired up, so her arms go back to kind of counterbalance, and her head goes in the direction she wants to go, and so it looks like this. And she zooms around the house, and if she needs to change directions, she has to move her arms and her head, and then she zooms back the other way. And it's miraculous. And what will happen is eventually, she'll be walking like normal, like second nature. She'll be able to walk and chew gum, walk and talk. No one will think about it. And y'all, I think this is kind of the picture of what has to happen. We fail to recognize that to walk with God, to take steps of faith and trust with God, for his formative work in us, it's miraculous. It's miraculous. And there's all sorts. So I remember we were thinking about this, because what's interesting, we got videos now of Lennon learning how to walk. And what's always interesting, there's somebody holding her and pushing her somewhere. And you know what? When she's starting off to walk and kind of standing up and starting taking steps, you know what everybody around her is doing? Everybody around her is cheering her on. Come on, you can do it. Let's go. They're so excited for her. If she takes a step, and you're like, ah! She's like, you got your cameras out, you're doing the whole thing. And she gets there, and you're all excited about it. And she gets to the very end, and she's about to fall, and she falls backwards, and boom, right on her bum. You know what nobody does? Somebody says, you're a terrible walker. How could you fall down? Right? No, they immediately extend their fingers out to her, and she grabs on, they pick her back up again and say, let's keep going. And that's the picture of what I think it needs to mean for us to walk, to help people walk with God. It's miraculous, it's imperfect. You know, when we're learning how to walk physically, it's miraculous and it's imperfect when we're learning how to walk with God. And what we need is sometimes we need somebody to encourage us and to cheer us on. Yes, you can do it, one more step. Because it's scary when you think you're gonna fall on your face, or it's scary when you're not sure there's anybody there to catch you. And when inevitably you do stumble or you do fall, you don't need people telling you what a terrible walker you are. You need someone extending themselves to you to help you return to start making more steps again. And that's the posture of our church. What a lot of us have happened, what you do is you have perhaps, you started off with a relationship with God. Maybe you're coming back for the first time in a long time. That happens every week here. And you fall, and what you think is that you're not cut out for it. That you're just a terrible, or you just, I promise I'll never fall again. And you do fall again, and you fall again, and you fall again. And then you just sort of give up because you just figure you're not cut out for it. And that's just not how this whole thing is designed to work. The beautiful thing about a walk is it's not made up of your promises or your intentions or where you came from or what you used to do. A walk is wholly defined by the step that you're willing to take next. And then next, and then next, and next. Isn't that a beautiful picture? That's what this is supposed to be like. So I want to kind of push into this today. I want to look at two places that we've looked at, one last week, and then kind of add one to it. The book of Colossians, these are two places where Paul is writing to people who he is helping to walk with God. And also I want for us to look in the book of Galatians, one of the famous passages, which has this list of things called the fruit of the Spirit. You might have heard this before, or you've probably had someone give you a card with this on there. It's the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. I want us to look at that in its larger context. But the beautiful thing again about a walk is it means doing what is in front of us, right? And then doing that again. And doing that again. When you start talking about your life as taking one step at a time, what you mean is that things are so uncertain, the only thing I can do is what's in front of me. And that's not actually a bad place to be or a bad place to live. Because in this walk with God, we have to learn how to acclimate. We're learning how to acclimate to being rescued from one domain and into another rule. We've been rescued into the rule that is governed by Christ, by King Jesus. And it's ruled by a fundamentally different set of values, and it requires a different pace and a different attentiveness in how we learn how to acclimate ourselves to this new way of life. And so what we have to be able to do, you know, in this whole idea, it's the pace, right, that we have to learn. The pace of our lives, the natural inclinations of our lives aren't likely to produce life in this other way. You're not likely to find the values of sacrifice and forgiveness and grace and humility and deference. They're not likely to be valued in the normal course of what your life is most likely pulled in. And so we have to learn how to take steps. We have to learn how to walk at the pace of God. We have to learn how to walk with him. In fact, this is how Jesus describes this. This is a translation from Eugene Peterson in The Message. And Jesus is talking about people who've just been promising and trying and giving all of their effort to learn how to find this life. And he says, I want you to come to me. And this is what he says. Come to me or get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Walk with me and work with me and watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. Is that not a great phrase? Like, can you imagine if your life was characterized by just unforced rhythms of grace? Does that describe anybody in here? It's like chaotic, pace, frantic, fast, right? The unforced rhythms of grace. Jesus says, I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. The language is relational. It's paying attention. It's walking with. It's walking with. And when we talk about walking with God, I don't mean you're walking with God on way somewhere else. I mean, it's just like a stroll, like you're walking, you're sharing. It's relational in its makeup. And we understand this, but it also does require movement and trust. And part of what you'll see, and what God is always doing, and what Paul's concern is in both of these places, is that we would know God, that we would know him. And the way I think about this is like this, right? We're going to put this up on the screen. There's this idea that we know God. And a lot of us have this sense that we know God because we know a lot of things about God. And I've been doing this a long time, and a lot of people will come to me and they'll say, Mike, I just need to go somewhere where I'm gonna, do something. I need something deeper than what I know. And what I found is a lot of people mistake trivia for depth. You think that because you know a lot of things about something, that means that you know something deeper, and that's not true. Deeper is taking something and having it mined down so that it actually transforms and begins to shape who you are. It's interesting, I read this illustration a few years ago. It's a little quirky, but you'll get the picture. But it had this guy who studied peaches his whole life. He studied peaches. He was a professor of teaching agriculture and stuff, and he knew like peaches from seeds to trees to plants. He knew the chemical makeup. He knew the skin texture. He knew all the facts about these peaches, except he never actually tasted one. Then you have a 6-year-old girl who picks up the peach and eats it. She says, oh, this is so good, right? And he says, which one actually knew the peach? And this is the point. Like when we think about this idea of knowing God, we're not talking about knowing facts about God. And we're talking about, the way I would think of this is that to be known in this way isn't just what you perceive about God or what you have found out about God, but it's about what God has revealed to you about himself. This requires something on our parts. And what happens in this is God reveals himself to you. We are given something. We are offered something. We are entrusted with something. And that is designed to build trust. And when you take and move and act on what you have known and trusted about someone, you know something more about them, which usually increases your knowledge, which increases your trust, which increases your knowledge, do you see how this works? And it just builds this cycle on things. This is why the posture is to know Christ and his power and his resurrection and his sufferings, to know him, to let him reveal himself to you, both in what he says to us through his word, what he models, what he whispers to us in his spirit. We're going to talk more about it in just a minute. But it's this sense that we have to learn how to acclimate to this, what God wants to do in us. We talk about faith around here, we define it like this, that faith is trust that is able to take a step. It's trust that is able to take a step. Trust in just I agree with this department is just doctrine, and a lot of people have this sort of compartmental idea that that's what faith is, but faith is trust that is able to actually move out into our lives, to take a step to experience something about God and his faithfulness and about who he is. And it's able, we use this word, we always argue about this, we always say willing, we don't argue, Mike always messes it up, we always say willing. It's able because this is empowered by God at his invitation, and he supplies the strength. Your walk is not just about the steps you take, but it's about the source of those steps. It's I'm doing these things by trusting God. This is part of the thing that's helped me and freed me perhaps as much as anything else, is learning this idea that I could actually take a step and believe in him or trust in him for something, and then see that he could be trusted more, and that he would continue to be faithful in forming me, not just getting me out of where I was at. And I learned this by learning how to kind of reacclimate my thoughts. It's like this, right? When Lennon's walking, when she does this, it's like her head determines what direction she goes. And the same is true for us. Right now, the natural inclination of your life, of your thoughts, are they Godward, or is there some other word you would use to describe them? Right? What I found out was that the default thoughts in my life, I was in my early 20s, the default thinking in my life were rarely Godward first. In fact, I found myself capable of thinking some pretty terrible things and getting fixated on pretty terrible things and finding myself wanting these kind of terrible things. It could be any number of things, whether it was like patterns of anxiety or patterns of lust or patterns of, well, you pick your issue. And you find it, does anybody else you find this to be true in their own brains? Okay, just making sure it's just not me. I was like, okay, I feel very all alone up here. And so what I did, I remember trying to figure out, why is my default thought this? Because when I would see something, it was, what would happen to my mind when it was left ungoverned? I remember thinking like, whoa, this is not great. Like, what happens to your mind? What happens to your thought life when nothing's entertaining you? When nothing's grabbing your attention, what happens in there? I mean, this is part of the dangerous thing about our phones is we don't have that very long, because we pull out our phones and we just start scrolling. But what happens in there? And what I remember, I was, like I said, in my early 20s, I remember thinking like, okay, this is the thought and it's there. And this is where I learned, like, take every thought captive and make it obedient to Christ, that the mindset on the flesh is death, but the mindset on the life, on the spirit is life and peace. I'm beginning to say, God, can this be true? How do I step in that direction? And what I did, I memorized Psalm 1. Blessed is the man who does not sit in the seat of scoffers, or stand in the path of sinners, or walk in the way of wicked. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates both day and night. And he will be like a tree firmly planted by streams of living water. And his leaf will not wither, and in due season he will bear much fruit. And so I just memorized that, and here was my experiment. Every time I have a thought that inclines me in a different direction from God, and something that isn't healthy or isn't good or isn't going to lead me where I feel like God wants me to go, the life I've been created for, I'm going to quote this verse. You can imagine how that went. It's like, this happens, you're like, blessed is the man, I can't even remember this. It's like a war, which is exactly how it's described in the scriptures. It's a war for your soul, to get your head inclined in the direction that you'll go. What I found was, it took about 6 months of doing this really diligently, 9 months, and I would find that these thoughts that were normally left unchecked were now at least rivaled by this idea that blessing is when you don't give in to these things, but you allow your mind and your heart to be saturated by what God has to say in his life, and you will be like a tree just firmly planted and sourced and nourished for the kind of fruitfulness that we're intended for. Do you see the picture there? And what you begin to find is that certain things now that would trigger one thought now begin to trigger other thoughts. And that's formation. That's beginning to become different. And it takes one step. And do you know how many times I failed in that experiment over the course of 6 months? A ton. But you know what you do? You have people around you who are helping you. Hey, let's get them to take another step. That's how it works. That's why we need each other, and that's how God's Spirit, right, tends to work in our lives. So here's what I want for us to see and just walk through this in the remaining time we have. This is from just review, but I just want to read it so we'll have it. Paul's talking about, he's praying for this group of Jesus followers, and he's like, I want you to be filled with the knowledge and all spirit. There's a kind of knowing that requires understanding and wisdom, and it fills us with that. And he says, this knowledge produces something in us. And then he gives us a list, so that you may walk in a manner, right? This is where we talked about. You may walk in a manner worthy of the Lord. That you may please him in all respects, bearing fruit in every good work, and then increasing in the knowledge of God. So if you're like a note taker, there's like 4 things there, right? It's that you walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, and that walk is comprised, these steps are comprised of pleasing him. And this is, I don't know, yeah. You get the idea, right? Bearing fruit, right? You get the idea. And then he goes on, he says, we're strengthened with all power according to his glorious might for the attaining of all steadfastness and patience, joyously giving thanks to the Father who has made it so, who has qualified you. You are now worthy of sharing in what? The inheritance of the saints in light. That's the description. And it's really important that you get that picture in your head for what we're going to read next. So the picture is that as we're walking, we begin to experience this sense of gratitude. Gratitude because God has made us worthy to actually take share of the inheritance that he's made available to us. Does that make sense? Everybody got that in your head? Okay, perfect. Because I promise you, you're going to think differently in about 4 minutes from now. This is Galatians, and I just want to jump right into this. You, my brothers and sisters, you were called to what? To be free. And then there's like instantly a warning, an assumption. But don't use your freedom to indulge your flesh. Is that not offensive? It's like, what do you think I'm going to do with my freedom? Well, of course what we're going to do with our freedom. We're going to use it for what we want. That's what freedom is for. Nobody else. This is how it's written. Paul's like, hey, look, you're made to be free, but you can't use your freedom the way you're likely to use your freedom for. Like, why would we misuse freedom? Why would you use freedom? Why would I misuse freedom? Do you know why? Because our desires, we have desires and affections, and we have longings that are contrary to the way in which God intends for us to be. We have them. Not only that, but we have desires and longings and affections that have been malformed by all the other experiences of our lives. It doesn't matter necessarily what it is, but when you see something that entices you, whether it's sensual, something seductive, it can appeal to our sexual desire, our sense of entitlement or jealousy, or a sense of superiority. Do those things tend to breed in you restraint or indulgence? I can answer the question for us if I need to. It's designed that way. This is the natural inclination of our desires. Nobody has to train us or teach us to do this. And what he's saying is, don't use your freedom to indulge in all of those things. There's got to be something that governs this. And rather, he says, serve one another in love, for the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. If you bite and devour each other, watch out, or you two will be destroyed by each other. These are like the only two choices we have. You either love each other or you're going to kill each other. That's the only two choices, right? And that's another message. But he goes on, he says this. Eesh. So I say walk, right? Here it is. Walk by the Spirit. And what's the promise? You will not gratify these pulls. If we learn how to walk by the Spirit, and then he just goes on, for the flesh desires what is contrary, the Spirit what's contrary to the flesh. They're in conflict with each other, so you just can't do whatever you want to do. Something has to govern this. If you're led by the Spirit, you're not under the law. And then he gives us a list. The acts of the flesh, these things that we're pulled into, they're obvious. And here's the list. Sexual immorality, I did a whole talk on this just a few weeks ago. I'm not going to do it again, so you can take a deep breath. If you want, it was Origins Part 5. You can go look it up, but these are the deeds that he says, the acts of the flesh, the things that we're likely to get caught in are obvious. Sexual immorality, impurity, debauchery, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage. Everybody finding your place in this list yet? Fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions, faction, and envy, drunkenness, orgy, and anything else like that. Like it's just this big kind of catch-all at the end, and the like. And this is what all of us do when we see this list. Almost all of us look at this list and try to either figure out which ones apply to us or which ones don't because we have reasons why we have done them. Like we're either trying to justify why we've done them and we don't fit in that list, or we're just feeling so guilty that we're just not worthy of anything anymore. And we're going to start promising that you'll never do them again. And this is what we're stuck in. And what he is saying, look at what he says next. I warn you, as I did before, that those who live like this will not what? And most of us just thought this means that we won't get into heaven when we die. This is why I said earlier, we walk with God, we joyously give thanks to the Father who has made you worthy to do what? To share in the inheritance that he has made available. Do you see the connection? Good, because I'm going to make it for you. This list of things is not a list of things that if you do them, you're not getting into heaven, or if you don't do them, you're getting in. This is a list of things that you and I are likely to indulge in without something governing or inclining us into a different way. And he says when we begin to participate in these things, when these things become our way of life, we no longer share in the inheritance that has been made available because they don't go together. Make sense? This isn't about feeling guilty or bad. It's about taking a step in the direction that you want to go and with him. This, and again, what you're going to see next, look at this. He goes on, he says, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things, there is no governance. You don't need any governance of these things. You just be as kind as you want, be as good as you want, be as faithful as you want. Those who belong to Christ have crucified the flesh. I mean, this is strong language, along with its passions and desires. Since we live by the Spirit, let us what? Keep in step with the Spirit. This is why walking with God is so important. We're learning how to derive our life from him. This is why when I wake up in the morning, and I'm a big advocate of journaling and doing quiet time, and I read my Bible, and I get myself still. I'm like, Lord, this day, like, let me sense and see your presence with me this day. I try to keep, surrender, like fresh repentance, all these things, because I want to learn how to do this. If we walk in the Spirit, these other things, right? These other things no longer have control or authority in my life. That's what we're talking about in the way of the kingdom. And so here's what I would ask for you to do. The goal of this is for us to live in a reconciled relationship to God and then live out of that relationship. That's what we're trying to do. And the beautiful thing about this is you don't do it by promising to do something or not to do something. You do this by simply taking a step. So I'm going to give you some frames, some questions. This will be, you may not be able to write all this down. I'm just going to walk you through them in this time. You can take them on your handouts. You can take them home and use them in your journal or whatever is best for you. We'll have them, I'm sure, online in some of our platforms in those places. But I just wrote down 4 categories. Knowing God. How am I knowing God? How are you knowing God? Are there places in your life where you don't trust God because of what you think about him already? Like I talk to people all the time, and we're our congregation, we have lots of people who come from lots of different backgrounds, and they grew up and they said, the God I grew up with was judgmental and distant and harsh and condemning. And so you're not going to trust a God like that. You might do what he tells you to do because you're afraid, but you're not going to trust him. And so the question is, how is God revealing himself to you? What does the cross mean to you when he demonstrates his love for you, his pursuit for you? How would those things shape and change your willingness to trust him? To know God. That's what Paul says. We increase in our knowledge of God, that will increase our willingness to trust him. Because sometimes to believe him for what he says, right, is the most trust that you can get to at that point in time. And you do that. And then you do it's a step. Number 2, endurance or patience, right? That was kind of second heading. Are there areas where you just want to give up? Maybe in your walk. Maybe you've been doing this and God hasn't done what you thought he should do, but somehow you sense that you should stay in. That was my story. You just sense that you should stay in this a little bit longer for this, and you don't even know the reason why. But is there something that you sense that way about? What would that mean for you? Are there places where just a consistent commitment might help you see something that you haven't seen before? And I don't mean this in any kind of disparaging or condescending way at all. I'm just saying, if you get up and you organize your time, we're going to talk about this in the summer, if you organize your time to connect with God and you do that regularly, the odds are going to significantly increase that you will actually be able to connect with him. Most of us are just fits and starts, and that's why you need people helping you do this all the time, because it's not natural. Number 3, how might, if you knew that God wanted you to bear fruit, love and joy and peace and patience and kindness, if you knew that he wanted you to bear fruit, how would you approach your everyday demands if you knew that they were actually like these good works that God had given to you? Like raising kids is hard. Some of you, you're moms and dads, and it just feels like if I wasn't doing this, I could be doing this is the good work. The good work is what God has put in front of you. Most of what we do is not a means to an end. It's actually important to our formation. How might the potential of you bringing beauty and nourishment to the world around you give you vision for all the tasks that we got to pull off every single day? Here's one. Is there something that you sense that God has asked you to do, or he's asked you not to do? And I can tell you, there probably is. What I found in my relationship with God is I always try to get out of those conversations. When I was trying to figure out if I was supposed to be in the ministry, I was doing my quiet time pretty much every day. And I'd go in the office before the office opened. I was working at an architecture firm. It was a great firm. It was a great job. It was like my dream. And I go in there and I open up my Bible, and the only thing I could hear God say to me is, "You're not doing what I've asked you to do." I'm like, why do you keep saying that to me, right? It didn't matter where I read. I'm like, I'm going to read Leviticus. And it'd be the same thing. And I was like, God, can we talk about something else? He's like, no, we can't. Do you know why? Because he was inviting me to trust him enough to take a step. Do you know why? Because if I could trust him enough to take a step, then I would come to know him more. And out of that, I would trust him more. And you develop a relationship, a walk with him. Even fighting temptation is an act of faith. It's trusting him enough not to do or engage in the patterns that may have crippled you in the past. And you find that he provides the strength to move you through, like all these things. It's about our walk with God. So what we're going to do, and this is just kind of what you can do this week, I'm going to pray for us, but I invite you next week, we're going to talk about summer reset. We're going to spend the whole summer kind of arranging our lives towards this end, and to do this together. And I think we're going to learn more and more and more profound ways for us to connect, even outside of this space, which I'm really excited about. And so, this is why we believe so deeply that we're to reach people and to help them walk with God. It is the way in which we determine, cultivate compassion. It's the way we posture ourselves to build trust. And it's the foundation upon which our lives are designed to flow from. Father, would you help us as we help one another? You are so gracious and so kind. I pray for those who have this view of you, that you're distant and removed and condemning. God, that you would reveal yourself to them now, that you would let them see you today as a God who loves and who cares, who pursues and who redeems. Father, would you do that to draw us in to know more about you, and out of that to trust you more. And this would give way to one step and another and another and another. And at some point in time, perhaps, this becomes the normal way in which we live. Until then, would you help us to incline ourselves and to help one another do that? We lift all this to you in the name of your Son, Jesus, who is our King. Amen.